Simply stated, there is no such thing as transgender.
Sorry, John, but you're spectacularly wrong again. Hey everyone, JL here, and welcome back to Bridge the Divide, where I examine irrational beliefs, the irrational behaviors that follow, and how we, with education, rationality, and reason, can bridge the societal divides that they create. The subject of today's video is one at the center of heated debates around the nation, from local jurisdictions all the way to the halls of Congress. That subject is the equal rights and representation of transgendered individuals. And despite a great many recent wins for the transgender community, the fight is far from over. Enter Pastor John MacArthur for the second time on my channel. You know him as the douchebag whose refusal to adhere to pandemic mandates has resulted in the deaths of a number of his congregants. Well, he recently focused one of his sermons against the trans community, and it was apparently so egregious that it was deemed hate speech and ultimately yanked by YouTube. So, with a little help, I was able to track down that video. And honestly, it was all I could do to keep my cool. So now, we're going to take a good hard look at the ignorant bigotry that John MacArthur often espouses. And hopefully, the public at large will begin to recognize this conspiracy-minded hate-monger for the vicious piece of shit that he is.
Simply stated, there is no such thing as transgender.
Great start, John. You'd think he'd realize that the very existence of this sermon contradicts that statement. I mean, people don't make a huge point that unicorns don't exist and then proceed to sermonize about how to identify and fight them.
You're either XX or XY. That's it.
We can tell from this statement alone that MacArthur's understanding of the subject never got past grade school. If it had, he'd be familiar with something called the karyotype test. Karyotyping is a test to identify and evaluate the size, shape, and number of chromosomes in a sample of body cells. It is because of this test that we understand that there are more chromosome presentations than just XX and XY. Because genetics are not binary in any sense, what we understand as the typical or heteronormative presentation of male and female is actually wildly incorrect. As much as some people might not like to hear it, we are all on a spectrum of biological sex presentation. Just because there are more cis presentations than there are transgender presentations in the population doesn't make them any less valid than any other human being. And MacArthur's cruel reduction of transgenderism to pure myth, in light of all the evidence, is just willful, bigoted ignorance. It is an act of desperation from someone so irreparably indoctrinated and so malignantly egotistical that he could never face the possibility that his book may just be made up by ancient peoples, or that his interpretation of that book may be completely wrong. For future reference, I've included a link in the description to a video by biologist Forrest Valkai, in which he gives an incredibly detailed and easy to understand breakdown of this entire subject.
God made man male and female.
Begging the question of a creator, nothing more. And the fact that MacArthur cannot or refuses to see that his entire message of societal division relies solely upon a logical fallacy should be forefront in all of his followers' minds.
That is determined genetically, that is physiology, that is science, that is reality.
We already understand that biological sex is a spectrum. That point is moot. But MacArthur here is also conflating biological sex with gender identity. Get this through your head, old man. Gender is a social construct, not a biological one.
This notion that you are something other than your biology is a cultural construct.
MacArthur is attacking the notion that cultural constructs are subjective and not necessarily true. But this is just a straw man. Because we understand that transgenderism and the many fields of science that are involved in explaining it are not cultural constructs. Cell theory, the theory that all living organisms are made up of cells, was first proposed by Theodor Schwann in 1839. The theory came from a more accurate understanding of our biology through improved microscope technology. New information led to a better understanding of our biological composition. The same goes for our understanding of genetics, biological sex, and gender identity. In short, John, it's not a cultural construct, it's evidence.
Intended as an assault on God.
Oh, you straw-manning piece of
The only way you can address it, honestly, is to say, God made you. And God made you exactly the way he wanted you to be.
I think this is the best example of John's communal narcissism fueling his top-left position. John believes that because of his position of authority, that he is the authority on anything he talks about. But because of his grandiose and inflated sense of self, he fails to see that the statement he just made would only serve to complicate matters further. When an individual suffers from gender dysphoria or body dysmorphia, just saying God made them this way does not solve the problem. It just cements in that individual's mind that God made them to be in pain. And the really sick part is, if they can convince them that this is the case, it opens the door for them to sell the idea that religion is the cure for that pain. No different than cutting someone with a knife, blaming them for it, selling them a bandage, and expecting them to be grateful.
You're not only fighting God in his physical creation, you are, even more importantly, fighting God in his sovereignty. You are fighting God in his spiritual relationship to you.
You know, I actually lost track of how many times MacArthur begs the question in this video.
This is a war on God.
It really isn't, John Boy. It's a change in understanding. A change that your ignorant, bigoted ass just can't deal with because it exposes just how wrong you are. And your inability to reconcile that is nobody's problem but your own. Grow up.
I'm not going to let God tell me who I am. I'm not going to let God define me. I'm going to be my own God. I'm going to define myself.
MacArthur has literally just told every Christian in the world that doesn't identify as he thinks God thinks they should, that they are in direct opposition of God. But like every bigot, his position is born out of ignorance and egotism. Forging one's own path or defining one's own identity or journey is not claiming to be a god. It's taking responsibility for one's own life. Because no one can live their life but them. And John still needs to address that if his all-knowing God knew that the way it created some people would leave them in constant pain, why wouldn't it, in comporting with its all-loving nature, simply not create them that way? If such a being were to actually exist, that would be an unnecessary torment that would only expose this entity as a capricious monster unworthy of worship. So, John, either your God is an asshole, or it doesn't exist. Either way, it's grounds for rejection of the claim.
And you're in Romans 1, and that's a reprobate mind. That's a mind that doesn't even function.
MacArthur is paraphrasing Romans 1:28 when he refers to a reprobate mind. And while it may seem that what he said is just another throwaway Christian insult, its actual meaning is far more insidious and potentially dangerous than many may realize. Because many may think of the term reprobate as meaning unprincipled or even depraved, but its Christian meaning is far darker. In the context of the Bible, a reprobate is someone rejected by God and is beyond hope of salvation. Calvinists use this word to describe someone not of the elect and destined for damnation regardless of their actions here on earth. MacArthur may argue that he's not using that word in that particular context, but he doesn't make that clarification. And regardless of his intentions, this word can be a dog whistle for how to perceive and treat those who are transgender. Intentionally or not, MacArthur is endangering human lives with his rhetoric. Something that I understand, even as an atheist, to be decidedly un-Christian.
So, while saying that with firmness so you understand it,
Oh, I've no doubt certain people understood you, John.
I think this has to be dealt with love and compassion.
Is this MacArthur's attempt to shield himself from responsibility for dog whistling to those that may take harmful action against trans individuals? Or did he use a slightly kinder interpretation of the text and just assume that everyone listening understood it the same way? I honestly can't tell. Either way, something seriously stinks in Grace Community Church.
Because there's some holes in the heart of someone going in that direction.
Going in that direction? People don't choose to be trans, John. They're born that way.
There's a lack of being loved and accepted and feeling wanted and needed and significant.
People are not transgender because of the things they don't receive from the people around them. They are transgender because of their genetics, something that is beyond the realm of their control. And those who are transgender don't need love, support, acceptance, or acknowledgement because they're transgendered. They need it because they're human beings.
So on the one hand, the reality of that lie and deception is so damaging, so destructive, so isolating, so corrupting that it needs to be confronted.
This is just disgusting. Lie and deception implies a choice is being made. And given how the vast majority of today's society vilifies and justifies the vilification of transgendered individuals, why would anyone choose to be transgendered if they didn't have to be? MacArthur's own treatment of them only strengthens the argument that transgenderism is not a choice. And the use of such terms as damaging, destructive, corrupting, and isolating, it's nothing more than a sly reinforcement of the disturbing view that transgendered individuals are emotionally unstable, mentally ill, or even dangerous. What John MacArthur just stated was unequivocally hate speech.
But on the other hand, that confrontation can't exaggerate what already exists, which is a sense of feeling isolated in relationships.
Transgendered people feel isolated in relationships because of ignorant, bigoted narratives that reinforce the social rejection of transgenderism. But MacArthur states that transgendered people feel isolated in relationships because they choose to be transgendered. This is pure victim blaming.
So you've got to find the fine line between confronting the error of it to protect the person and at the same time providing the love and affirmation that that person needs to be all that God would have that person be.
And MacArthur's point finally becomes horrifically clear. Transgendered individuals should be approached with love and acceptance. Just not acceptance for who they are, but the acceptance for what other people think God thinks they should be. Ultimately putting their personal psychological comfort ahead of the physiological and psychological agony that this would leave the transgendered individual in. Let's just call a spade a spade, John. Your entire sermon has been a subtle advocacy for psychologically torturing people that make you feel uncomfortable. I admit, it was difficult for me to get through this video without punching my screen. Individuals like John MacArthur are well-versed and verbose enough that they can often disguise one message with another. They can often say one thing to one group of people and at the same time bank on the ignorance of another group to imply that they said something completely different. The behavior of individuals like this cannot simply be censored as YouTube has chosen to do. It must be directly called out, loudly and publicly. Because given the level of hatred, intolerance, and violence that the trans community receives on a daily basis, your awareness could very well save a life. Thank you for joining me for another Bridge the Divide. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. And be sure to hit that bell for notifications. I would also like to hear your thoughts on this subject, so be sure to leave a comment below. And don't forget that February is Cancer Awareness Month, hence the purple beard. So be sure to check the link below to see where you can support this cause. And if you dig scary movies, be sure to check out me and my filmmaker friends over at our podcast, Weekinhorror, now in our 3rd season. All of the links you need to support this channel and the podcast are in the description below. Thank you again for joining me. And as always, be safe, be excellent to each other, and together we can bridge the divide.